My name's Jade, Head of Sector Development at the Australia Council for the Arts, and some of you were here yesterday. We're also joined by Sandra Fields from Fieldworks, and together we've been working on the Reignite framework over the past couple of weeks. Before we start, I think it's incredibly important to not only acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we gather and elders past and present. I would really like to pay my respects in particular to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people on the call today, and thank you for being here. It's also important to acknowledge that Indigenous, people of colour, Black communities the world over are really suffering, in particular at the moment, and there's no one really more tired than these artists, communities and organisations in the current climate. It's difficult to be having a conversation about reignition and what that means for the creative and cultural sectors in the context where some of our communities, friends and colleagues are being so heavily impacted by the systemic oppression that we know exists the world over. So I just want to acknowledge that that is the context by which we're meeting in today, and that we really want to take the time to say to, particularly to First Nations participants, colleagues, artists and organisations, along with people of colour, if there are other ways that we can help to support you to engage over this time that aren't necessarily about showing up to conversations like this, please do reach out, let us know. We certainly want to make that happen where we can. It also indicates that we live in a world of multiplicity always. Not only are we walking together and fighting for this current context, we're also working in a world of COVID-19 impacts and devastation. So I just wanted to acknowledge that we are kind of together working through simultaneously some really difficult issues, and I just want to acknowledge that that's where we know we are. So thank you again for joining us today. I'll hand over to Sandra Fields.
Thanks, Jade. It's great to see so many faces back here again today. I'm looking forward to this conversation immensely, and kind of connecting into what Jade was saying is that this is part of a process, and there's a deeper process happening in about a month's time, or commencing in a month's time. So I've had some great responses from the conversation yesterday, and here's an opportunity to kind of talk in a little bit more depth around some of your issues and ideas around working in this COVID environment. We posted questions. When I say we, I need to give a shout out to Norm and Sarah because they're all over this much more than I am. The questions for today's discussion, and there's 3 of them. The first one is, what's kind of getting in the way, or what are the problems that we need to fix that the COVID environment is how it's impacting on you as artists or arts organisations or groups. So that's the first question. What's the problem that we need to fix? And I know for some people they don't want to work in a problem-focused environment. So the other part of the problem is, what's the opportunity? So A, what's the problem or opportunity that we're trying to fix or address? The second one is, what are your ideas for resolving that in the short term or the medium term or the long term? Knowing that the next round of consultation that AusCo will do is really focused on that very long-term work. So we're particularly interested in the short and to medium term. And the third question, and I've heard this loudly and clearly and totally agree with it personally and professionally, is that the industry needs some more solid and ongoing resourcing. But the solution isn't resourcing. The solution is, what would you do if you get those resources? So that's the 3 questions. What are the problems we're trying to fix or the opportunities that we're trying to address? The second question is, what are your ideas or solutions for that, particularly in the short to medium term? And the third question is, if you did get some more resources, what would you like to do with them? So that's the framework for today. We have, obviously there's a chat on the side, and Feral Arts are doing a fabulous job in recording all of that. So we'll get anything that you put in that chat, any of your ideas or issues or solutions will go into there, and we'll include that in this piece of work. And then I want to try with all these people having some conversation in the middle. In doing that, I encourage you to try to be pointy, because we have, normally the little lunches are 30 minutes. Today we're going to try going for 45. I also understand if some people need it to be a little lunch and not a big lunch, and need to jump off early. So I think from here, just looking at the housekeeping, both Manna and Ray are doing the captioning for us today, and Linda is doing the Auslan. So if we, I think maybe Susan is also doing some Auslan today. I'm just going to put it out there as an open question to start off with. At this point, in the world of COVID. Oh, and sorry, one last thing before that. For those of you who weren't on yesterday, this piece of work has a time parameter around it. We know that the world of COVID is moving really quickly, and the responses by governments are really quick. We call it the 20-minute shift here at Fieldworks. And so we want to make sure that you're at the table, that arts and culture are at the table around the next range or round of decision making. And so that's why this is time limited. So we will have this piece of work in a draft with OzCo on Monday next week. And that's really it. So that's why I'm trying to get as much as I can from you. That we've had lots of conversations with lots of different people over the last week. But here's an opportunity. So I'm going to shut up now and present that first question, which is, what are some of the things that we need to fix, or opportunities that we need to address in this COVID environment, big or small?
Can I start? I don't mind starting here in the regions. I think that the challenge I'm seeing is people's personal motivation to keep on going. There's a sense of well-being. You know your organisation's objectives. You know that if you don't put those resilient grants in, you know your organisation might collapse. But people are actually personally feeling really challenged.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm seeing a lot of reach out in Facebook groups and on through this forum with a little lunch around that. So what's your thoughts around that, Sandra?
Thanks, Melissa. That's a common theme that we're hearing. And of course, that's not just this sector, but it's actually deepened, I think, in this industry, both in terms of the wonderful people who make up this industry and the impact that you have on communities. I'm wondering whether, if that's one of the problems that we need to try and address, does anybody have any ideas about potential solutions for that?
Sorry, I just joined late. Could you repeat the question?
So this first question is, what are the problems that we're trying to fix that have arisen because of COVID, / what are the opportunities that we would like to address or grab hold of? And if nobody's got any solutions at this point to the problem that Melissa has posed, we will just take that on notice and we'll keep working through it. So thank you.
I don't know if it's a solution, Fieldsy, but I think it's a continuation of that conversation.
Yeah.
But I think it's a possible solution, which is that the people that I have seen most active in this time have been very small, independent organisations or individual artists, many of whom don't have ongoing funding or operational. So I think Melissa's right. We are exhausted and we're having to kind of do that churn to get more funding in this period to keep ourselves afloat.
Yeah.
And there are mechanisms that are in place that could, so how do we diminish some of that process? So what are the ways in which we can actually better support, not for small amounts of money, not through that kind of competitive process, but actually think about the ecology in real terms around our independence and our small, very small micro orgs like ours, which employs only me. How do we support those organisations better, rather than the support that, like, I think it's fantastic. We've seen at a state level support for a number of our orgs through extension of the funding, and Australia Council, obviously, a number of people have got through that round, but certainly for those that aren't part of those processes, it's pretty tough.
Yeah, okay. And so I think I'm probably hearing something like a bit more of a systemic approach to how we do that, rather than having to keep, oh, look at all the heads bobbing. That means I got that one. Thank you. Okay, got that one. Thanks, Katie.
Sandra, could I jump in and say that whenever in times of crisis, it brings like a boil to the surface, all of the underlying problems, whether it's poor funding in the health section, inequality in education, or poor resourcing of the arts. So I think for us, and I run Artisan up in Queensland, COVID just piles on top of the existing problems, and everything is getting very, very thinly stretched. Mental health is definitely, I second that. I think it would have been really good to have seen some kind of reach out from state and federal funding bodies to see how those small to medium or all arts organisation staff are doing. I've spent an hour this morning with my staff who we haven't reopened, and they're petrified of reopening a retail outlet where people need to touch and try things on. You know, they've got a lot of anxiety, and I certainly, as a peak body for craft and design in the state, we've had no one sort of pick up the phone and say, how are you going? So I would have liked to have seen a little bit more outreach from the powers that be.
Thanks, Claire. It's interesting. There is a very, very strong theme coming through everybody that I speak to, that it is a little bit like a, big zit, and that there's an underlying issue that hasn't been resolved, and it's just festered up because of that. It's interesting for us as we do this piece of work. If you look at other industries, for example, they're able to go, this and this is a result of COVID. Cause effect, and what I'm hearing from many people, particularly First Nations organisations and artists and arts workers, is that this is a systemic problem that's been around for a long time, and it needs to be redressed and addressed. So yeah, we've heard that, we'll take that on. And the second part of what you're saying, Claire, is about how do we support the organisations and people around to be okay, and who is doing that check-in. So I haven't heard the bit about needing the check-in before, but I think that's very real, particularly for the people who are leading organisations, and you're the people supporting your team and your staff and your artists and creatives, but who's supporting you? I can see a cattail. Ha, great. Thank you, Claire. And I've been thinking about Artisan and how do I go and buy something nice to support your artists. Anyway, I'll move on.
Sandra, it's Kate Wood here. Pardon me, everybody. My camera doesn't seem to be working today. And I've got to be at another meeting in about 15 minutes. So I just want to, if it's okay, can I put something in here about the access requirements of artists with disabilities? I just want to make the point that because of COVID-19, we are not getting the personal support that we need, because we don't have workers coming in, being able to come in and do our basic personal needs, actually, with PPE. And so I'm wondering if there's something the Australia Council can do for artists with disabilities or who are deaf, adding a bit of money to pay for things, pay for personal support, which enables us to keep working as artists, actually. It's a very real problem for us.
Thank you, Kate. Would I be able to give you a call a bit later today, just in terms of how that resourcing might happen and where the arts where the arts role and the health role meet together, and making sure that we're really clear about that gap. And
Absolutely. I would love you to do that, Sandra. Absolutely.
Could you just send me a little message then, a private message or something with your email or phone number?
Yeah, lovely. I'll do that.
Great. Thanks, Karen.
Hey, Fieldsy.
Colette. Hi, Colette Brennan. Look at you.
I love you.
Hello.
I love so many people on this. It's actually outrageous. I wanted to do a few positives amongst the shit show that is COVID. I wanted to begin by thanking the Australia Council for the leadership, because I think it exposed an industry-wide issue that we have, that when problems occur, there is something in the way our organisation, independence to organisations to peaks, are structured that do not let us work nimbly across multi-art forms. So I feel actually these are industry issues that have been exposed, and it was just fantastic to see the Australia Council jump into that space. I'm not necessarily sure it is always really the responsibility of the Australia Council and funders to do this work as well. So I think it's a big moment in time for a reconsideration about how we mobilise, how we function as a really savvy, incredible sector with so much richness and diversity, but how do we get a compelling message across? One, even within our sector, how are we managing the comms to our sector at times like this? And I think it will take all of us. It's not just me looking to the Australia Council or funders. I think all of us need to collectivise in a different way. But what I've been bolstered by amongst the shit show is how quickly things can change. So seeing funders quickly adapt to actually a need. In our sector, we've had these needs before, but they haven't been as pronounced. So I would love to see the whole sector and funders be able to move more nimbly like this in future. So is there some sort of structural approach where contingencies can be built in so that industry-focused, need-based programs can be developed quickly and efficiently? So that's one piece of learning I think we've had from COVID, is that when we need to, we can actually move fast. And I'd love to see that nimble energy continue. And the other thing I think it's really highlighted is that we are a collective organised a sector, but we need to be linked with others, in particular health. I think we've always talked about health and well-being and health outcomes, but we haven't learned, like sport, to get those incredible partnerships. So I'd love to see some leadership from the from bureaucracy, the Office for the Arts and state-based ministries to formalise those partnerships so that our artists can be richly supported to present their work, not just during COVID and pandemics, but always with an eye to health standards. The other thing I'd just like to note is that for organisations like us, we don't think that the world is going to plug in, and we're actually really excited about our research and development phase. So we would be encouraging funders to see this moment in time as an incredible moment for research and new ways of thinking about audience engagement that might generate new innovations. So that's it from me.
Thank you, Colette Brennan. Would anybody like to comment on that or add anything to that? Because I actually think in there, Colette, you raised opportunities and things that we want to hold on to, which I have got those 4 points written in my pen. Thank you very much.
The only other point I would make, sorry, it's me again, annoying, about that is I think audience development has been really interesting for us and engagement with new audiences, but I also think there's something about access that maybe we should all be considering moving forward. So as a regional org, I do a lot of stuff face-to-face, but that means driving from one end of the region to the other. And actually, how can we consider some of the use of technologies that we've started to bring into our practice all of a sudden, as part for some of us, not for all of us, all of a sudden, acknowledging some great work by folks who've been working in that space for a long time. But how can we as an org, me particularly, consider the use of those technologies in an ongoing way so that access continues to communities who might not be able to turn up at a workshop or an event. I think that's the other point I would make about the new audiences we're reaching.
Oh, and I've just got to add to that, which might be new funding categories, that we need money to support the cleaning. We need money to support the infrastructure that goes around these new innovations in audience engagement. So we might need just to change those structures in and around the artist.
Yeah, thanks. I've heard, so both of those things that both of you are talking about, there's a consistent theme going on there. Jude, I think.
Sandra, yeah, I want to tune in. Hi, Colette. Hi, Katie. Look, I'm most interested in what you've got to say, Colette, about getting the money from the right people and sport being used as an analogy. This fascinates me because statistically we beat sport on every front. You throw the numbers up all the time. They do not work. The Philistines who are running everything don't even see them, straight over the head. So my question is, how do we best advocate? My only answer to that is to be visible. Visibility for me is the only advocacy because the figures don't work, never work. So how do we advocate to get that kind of money coming into us?
Yeah, and Jude, that is something that's also consistently being talked about. Why is it that we're in month 3, I think, and there's a sense that arts and culture, so whether it's real or perceived, I'm not commenting on that, but a sense that arts and culture aren't at the table where the big decisions are being made. And this is part of that piece of work, is that Australia Council and a number of people in this industry recognising that that's not happening, and this is what that piece of work is supposed to be. But in an ongoing way, it has to get deep and clever and strategic. And only when that happens will it mean that we're not sitting here having the same conversations that we could have been having 20 years ago.
One of the things you might attend to, Sandra, is making sure that the word arts appears on the door of the minister who is supposed to be looking after us at the moment.
Yeah, thank you, Jude. I'm just going to hand to Jade because she's just trying to.
Sorry. I just want to encourage people to use the raise hand little section in participants, because I'm just noticing that Anne Grant's had her hand up for a little while. I'm happy to keep an eye on that. It just might be a slightly easier way to make sure everyone can say thank you. And then we've got Lillie in there as well. Thanks.
Okay, Anne, that's over to you.
I'm trying to learn how to use this.
Well, you put your hand up, so that's a good thing.
I did that. I put my hand up now. I just want to chat so I can chat. Is that right?
Go talk, yep.
Excellent. Okay. We're 3B Creative. Jude knows us. We're a not-for-profit on the Sunshine Coast. And I think audiences, I'm just talking in terms of generally, audiences are also the people that we have to start talking to in terms of their comfort to come to something. It's not been addressed in terms of how we've been asking people to bring along their own stuff to live performances, so that we provide the space, we provide the performance, but they actually have to bring their own chair. We don't have to worry about cleaning, all of those sorts of things. And it's been incredibly successful. Where there's quite a demand for what we're doing. I feel like this is not part of like the big discussion that you're having, but I think people are so thirsty at the moment for having anything live. It's a sadness for a lot of people. It's the way they've always socialized as well to, how do I explain it? And also to keep my actors and whatever still moving, still being challenged. One thing we found, we often start from a written work, and what has been fabulous is that because it's when you're paying licensing and that sort of stuff, it's beyond the number of people that you're allowed to, proportionally, it's not going to pay for the rights. I found the playwrights we've approached have waived their licensing fee so that we can actually bring stuff, and that has been, it's fabulous. It's terrible that it has to come from an arts person that they will do that for us, but they're making these wonderful concessions. I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Yeah,
okay.
Thank you, Anne. And you're right, we need to try to minimise trying to get free stuff from our own sector or industry, but actually collaborations are important. And the issue around audiences and how to address that. We've heard very consistently across everybody that we're speaking to, knowing that audiences are one part of this pie. The other part is artists and creatives and the people that sit around that. And the other part is broader community participation beyond audience.
How are we going to
so
make them feel comfortable?
Yeah, exactly. And so one of the ideas that has been coming up is, what does a national comms strategy look like for coming back to the arts? And embedded in that comms strategy, what does it look like coming back to the arts and embed First Nations arts and cultural activity in that? Because that has been remiss for a very long time. So that's sort of evolving at the moment. So there's a couple of people. We've got Lenine with her hand up, and then we have Claire.
Hi, Fieldsy. Thanks again, guys, for coming on today. I just wanted to raise the issue about poverty and the issue that's really impacting independent artists. You've probably heard it, but I'm seeing probably like weekly now, friends moving out of their houses. They can't afford rent. I've been running a food bank at my house the entire time, particularly for people who already do things like work in hospitality, work in childcare, like supply teachers. All of our other incomes dried up. So even artists that any of the consultancy work that people would have done. So I think some of what I would call the class issues in the arts sector, when you're hearing messages like the Victorian Symphony thinks with their 14 million, they're going to become, whatever the word is, like insolvent by Christmas, and they put all of their players on JobKeeper, you kind of wonder, like, if they can't keep it up, what the fuck is going to happen to us? So there's that kind of problem. So when I'm seeing things about what does the sector need to do and how do we communicate and whatever, I mean, I'm just actually really nervous about, like, the conversations I'm having are little tiny things. Like, if you get a grant and you put it on your ABN, you have to claim it as income, which means you get kicked off Centrelink. Then when you get kicked off JobKeeper, how long does it take to get back on JobKeeper? How long does the grant live for? I mean, the grant's not designed to supplement your income. The grant's designed to be able to run a project out of, right? And then you look in Queensland, where the state government won't allow you to do auspicing. They've had this rule forever for independents, which is a joke. So in Queensland, I can't get Auspicious Arts, who is a much more efficient agency. They've even raised it with the state. So then I'm having to go and do the labour to contact my local member and the minister in Queensland. And I'm like, where's the peak body doing that work for me? So I think while we're looking at the big infrastructure, and I think we've got leaders like people like Colette and lots of people working in organisations, innovating and thinking about how they can get artists working again, and they need a lot of support to be able to do that. I feel like we're getting a lot of mixed messages about the impacts financially to arts organisations. And then as freelance artists, we're all sitting out here going, I am literally trying to keep a roof over my head for my kids. So I feel pretty emotional about it. And it's every conversation, every single day is trying to keep people fed and housed. And then if you're a Black artist or a First Nations artist or a disabled artist, or you've got any other shit going on in your life, like, it's mission critical now that we get some money to these people. So, I mean, the Maya Go, I don't know anyone who got any of that money because they only had $1 million, $1,000 each. That's not many people. The Ozco only had $5 million. I mean, that money dried up in seconds. So I just think there's a really big problem here that really needs to be addressed that nobody's listening to. And I'm not just talking about me. I have so many friends who I'm talking to daily, and I just think, how's anyone going to get through this? Like, and in 4.5 months' time, when JobKeeper winds up, like, what is going to happen to our industries? So I'm really emotional about it because I feel like I've been sitting on these conversations. I mean, when Frank did his very first one, we had this beautiful dancer from Melbourne speak at Little Lunch Online, and she just burst into tears as well, and we don't know what to do. And so you've got to feel safe and comfortable. I mean, I hate Maslow's hierarchy, but it's pretty simple. If people don't have housing and food, how are artists going to make work? So I think we just need to get clever. And meanwhile, we're going to give $25,000 to do house renovations. So we've got some big mixed messages happening in Australia. Unfortunately, you guys in this piece of work has just landed in the middle of it.
Yeah. And thank you, Lenine.
Sorry for the tears.
No.
It's just, I don't sleep very much because of my toddler. I'm emotional, but I'm also just sleep deprived.
But I think that you raised something that's critical to this conversation. And if this piece of work that we're doing right now can't address that, then we've got a huge problem. And so just so that you know, I've been trawling your Facebook comments so that we've been gathering that information. So things that you've said through social media, I've been collecting. So thank you. And thank you for sharing that online as well. And I know that it's hard, and I know that stuff is quite exposing. And what I would like to do, because there's a couple of things in there that are quite detailed, if you don't mind, can I give you a call offline and get some of that detail together and even build a little case study around it, if that's okay? Great. Thank you, Berkey. Okay. Hit me, Claire.
Hello, me again. Sorry, I will lower my hand. Now, I actually just wanted to pick up something that Jude had said, and I think about sport quite a lot. In Queensland primary schools, we've got no dedicated visual arts instruction. There is music and there's religious instruction, but no vis arts. And if you've got young children who want to engage in visual arts, it is really dependent on the principal. Now, parents are also offered a certain amount of money to get kids back into sport. What sporting codes do very well, which the arts do not, is that they foster the grassroots and they have clear, obvious pathways from juniors, intermediates, amateur, professional, all the way through. We are not doing that. We are not providing opportunities for young people to start their creative practice, continue their creative practice, and master their skills. We don't have that same level of pathway. And so that's where I think education is very, very important. And of course it feeds into health and well-being and, cultural continuity, all that kind of stuff. But I think that there are lessons that if the arts could look at some of the sporting codes and how they manage that continuity, there are learnings for us. We have to, stand back, look objectively, and see if we can use some of the good stuff.
Yeah, and I think, Claire, your point is very pertinent and is one of those things about we don't want to go back to how it was before. We want to imagine the new thing. And so that piece of work, like that's that kind of, as we move forward and reimagine what this industry sector, really what arts and culture needs to be in the lives of our community, needs to be in that big conversation.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, I was going to say, and it also fits into that whole conversation about elitism. Yes. I have an 8-year-old, and if I want her to do art at school, I have to pay $30 an hour to have private classes after class.
Yeah. And so it's that thing about embedding it in. There was a piece, just I digress a tiny bit, but a piece of work I did for one of the music peaks, and what we ended up using was a framework that Aussie Rules Football uses, which was, and I can't, it was one of the particular states, but it was gold in terms of how it embeds and what it does. And so then we actually took that and applied that to a music context and thought about that in terms of education as well. So, but yes, I hear you, and I'll put that in the stuff in terms of that kind of reform and the new world. Great. I'm just seeing, anybody got their hands up?
Melissa.
Where's Melissa? Go, Melissa. I can't see you on my page.
Hey, yeah, I'd like to pick up back on the sessions that we've been listening to with Frank and even Wendy Ware from Australia Council, and the issue around advocacy, that we don't have true sector advocacy at the moment. Australia Council have made it very clear to us that they're not in the business of doing that, and that they give advice and to government, but the advocacy issue is really key. And I think that goes back across to communicating with the mainstream broader community around that. And yet we have this incredible opportunity to point to all the creative content that's being uploaded by the microsecond about how that's kept people going through this time. So it feels to me like there's this massive elephant in the room. No one's taking the job on to that advocacy. And is that best placed in peak agencies that are funded versus this, I think, arts front movement being more community led, as in us ourselves. So Yeah, I wonder
yeah.
what.
So that's an issue that we've heard across. One of the things that I feel very strongly about is that you are an industry, and together need to be thinking like this is a collective industry with a collective voice that can talk about the whole of this complex, broad and deep industry, so that you're sitting at the table with other industries like tourism, like retail, like sport, and at the moment you're not there. It's also not necessarily the role of, in my opinion, of OSCO to be doing that. They're doing a great job at the moment about filling a gap that's there, but I think it's a fundamental issue. I've also heard very loudly and clearly from First Nations artisan organisations that it's even worse for them because there isn't anything like that. And so trying to build something that fundamentally changes the system and gives a coordinated and united voice, whatever that looks like, for your industry is important. Norm.
Hi, we just wanted to throw in a little bit on this. It has been coming up in Arts Front and the Little Lunches quite a lot.
Yeah.
What Council's done, particularly so for the 4-year funding for 2021, is this amazing thing of sharing that across a number of different companies. And that kind of approach to sharing is something that we're seeing in the small to medium companies and independents, and it's kind of picking up on what a lot of the stuff that Nanine was raising. And the conversation about transparency of what companies are doing right now in terms of supporting independent artists and making every effort to get their existing resources that they have in this year's budgets available for people to use. So from an example point of view, Feral Arts has done a rebudget based on the fact that we don't need to travel this year and we don't need to deliver face-to-face events, and we're putting that money into the investment and making it available for independent artists. Now, the Australia Council has gone to companies and said, we need your financial statements and this to advocate, but it hasn't gone to the sector and said, tell us what you're doing right now in this space so we can coordinate and connect it. Because there's an enormous resource base sitting there that isn't being used in the most effective way. So Council can take on that role and lead that stuff through its communication with its existing companies to make sure that those current resources are being used in the most effective way.
Thank you, Norm. That I haven't heard that one yet before. So, and I haven't been involved in the Little Lunches, so I've got that down, and that would be something that we will put on the urgent now needs to happen list. Great. Sue?
Miranda's also there, Sam.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see Miranda. Well, who was first?
Doesn't matter.
Just a quick point, just on the advocacy thing, because there are there is a lot of advocacy happening at the moment, and so part of it's about who is actually being informed or who is finding out about what's happening, but also that advocacy belongs on so many levels at the same time. And it's really important that we all are given the tools, or we feel that we have the tools to be able to make the arguments ourselves. And I think that kind of sharing could probably happen a lot more widely as well. And it also depends sometimes on whether you agree with the messages that those advocates are pushing. So I think that's part of our job, is really making sure that the messages that are being pushed by those advocates are being shared and shared more widely.
Yeah, so it's a multiple layers. It's not a single approach. It's the multiple approach. Thank you, Sue. Mirinda?
Yeah, hi, sorry I was a little bit late, but really interesting conversation. We've done over 130 consultations at Black Dance since COVID-19 started. We hold a fortnightly independent sector. Black Dance is the national peak body for Indigenous dance. We hold a fortnightly independent sector Zoom where all the First Nations independent dance makers are welcome to join. We hold a fortnightly local Meanjin arts and cultural sector Zoom where all Black Brisbane-based cultural practitioners are invited to join. We hold a fortnightly gathering with our peer organisations, the other self-determined Indigenous performing arts companies, and Black Dance participates in the Australia Council's Industry Roundtable, the Peak Body Arts Peak fortnightly gathering. We've organised Tony Burke and a couple of other ministers to have and deputies to have First Nations roundtables to listen to the First Nations arts and cultural sector. And so when statements are made that peak bodies aren't doing enough advocacy, I don't know how much more advocacy I can do. And it's just, it's a really interesting, it's been a really interesting time because, you know, when Black Dance has these meetings with the arts peaks and we sit alongside AMPAG and LPA and TNA, you know, I realised that first of all, we have no baseline data for independent First Nations artists about where they make their money, how else they supplement their artistic practice. You know, do they do tax returns? Like all the baseline data we don't have. So then I can't advocate effectively for the independent First Nations dance sector just as a starting point because we don't have that baseline data. Then secondly, you know, AMPAG and LPA and TNA or you know, I mean, I'm not trying to call out particular organisations, I'm just sort of saying as the arts peak conglomerate, what I have witnessed is that all those organisations have very strong relationships with government, and that they are in there doing lobbying and they are doing advocacy, and you know, there's not that same level of engagement with the Indigenous peak bodies at all. Like we've never been, apart from Tony Burke, and Leanne Enoch, we've never had any other engagement with any politician, and you know, we just don't have any cut through, and it's probably the same for culturally and linguistically diverse communities. It's probably the same for disability. It feels like some of the peak bodies are competing with themselves around their messaging, and it feels like the more money you have, the more opportunity you have to meet with government. And if you're not in there having those meetings, then your messaging is being left off. And, you know, just in the last week, I have written to all of those peak bodies and said, can you please include self-determination in your key messages to government? And yes, there's alliances that have been built between some of those peak bodies and Black Dance and the First Nations companies in our communities. But you know, when push comes to shove and people are trying to fight for stimulus packages or, you know, recovery packages, like, I don't know if the moral compass stays. I don't know if people always go, well, you know, the culturally and linguistically diverse sector has actually nothing. Are those peak bodies fighting for that? I don't know. I'm sorry, it's a little bit rambly, but I just want to feed into the conversation, say that as a First Nations peak body, we're doing as much as we possibly can.
Thank you, Marinda. I think I've actually written 5 things in here, and I just want to check in that I've got it right. So the first one, which is also where you loop back to, is that peak bodies are, many peak bodies are trying really hard and are also exhausted. And part of the issue is that the challenges around cut through. You can do as much in advocacy as you like, but if there's no cut through which results in influence, then it's a bit of a problem. So that's the first one. The second one is a need for research, particularly around First Nations impacts and effects. And that kind of loops back to one of Colette's points around using this opportunity for doing some really good research, but let's make sure that we've got First Nations and the gamut in there about disability and culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, etc., etc. that sounded really bad, pretend I didn't say, etc. Colette, do you want to say something?
I just do want to add to this that the problem we have on the ground is Marinda can have her constituency, and that's black dance. Yeah. But if you're a multi-arts organisation or an individual artist like Lenine doing a food bank, yeah, we do not have time to navigate every single peak body that exists. So with the greatest of respect, peaks do incredible jobs. But at a moment like this, it's not helping. Everyone's too tired, it's too siloed, there's no unified voice, no one understands how to advocate. If you're not a member, you don't get represented. So it's already, you know, there's some deeply flawed moments. So let's, you know, it's my normal rave. I'm telling you, in Ireland, they're not doing a here's dance, here's the LPA thing, here's rah-rah, they're doing save the arts. And my final point is, my friend is an advisor to an arts minister and said it is very difficult for an arts minister to make quick decisions when there are that many peaks to get feedback from. And what is the industry-wide position? Yeah. An incredible opportunity to nail this now and get ourselves sorted.
I think that if, I mean, there's many things that need to get right in this opportunity, and I, you know, said it yesterday, don't let a good pandemic go to waste. So let's not waste this pandemic. And that there's a reality that until you have a single industry body for your industry that sits at the table with the other industry bodies, that still has a need for the peaks, but is a business of the business industry body for the country, then you're not going to, and then things like this are going to keep coming up. And once, if you can get an industry body, then OzCo can focus on what OzCo's role is, and OFTA, you know, like the peaks can focus on their peaks, you know, all of that. So, and I can see heads bobbing and thumbs. So let's, I'll really ramp that up in this piece. Thank you. Marinda?
I just want to also add, I also agree with you, Colette, which I know that you know, but the thing that we have put actually for years now, but with way more intensity at the moment, the thing that we have put as our #1 priority is a national cultural arts peak body, or a NIACA, and it's obviously long overdue. And at those industry roundtables, you know, I always say, in the absence of a national cultural arts peak body, we're finding this really, really challenging. You know, like, it's in all of our submissions, it's in which we are trying our hardest actually to focus our advocacy on getting that. And actually, I'd like to know from the Australia Council what the barrier is and how we as a sector can propel it to the next stage, because it feels like it's been close to being the next stage for a few years, but it hasn't quite ever gotten there. And I don't know how much more else that I can do, or that we as a sector of performing arts orgs can do, because we're trying our hardest.
Jade, did you want to respond to that, or?
Only that, Marinda, I know that there's a bunch of us at council meeting with you in a couple of weeks, hopefully, and that's definitely on the agenda. I'm very happy to take it up internally as well and chat with Lydia, obviously. Yeah. Can I just take a moment to add something about the peak conversation? And
it's
sorry, just the fact that what I absolutely see from First Nations peaks, and this includes you and your excellent work, Marinda, is that from a First Nations perspective, you can't operate in isolation from an art form perspective. You have to be across all of the work that's happening for the creative and cultural people in that particular area. CACD does this similarly because it's a multi-art form space. Absolutely, what we see is the lack of coordination at an industry level is slowing this process down, makes it very difficult to cut through. Yeah. I'm just responding back to your point, Melissa. Advocacy is part of our agenda, 100%, but lobbying is not, and they are different. And the industry has to, in some ways, take that particular piece up and run with it. we can provide the research, the evidence. I know we're talking with Marinda and the First Nations Peaks about getting that baseline data. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's there and will be published and continue to be published for the sector. And whilst I've really noticed since the Brandis cuts period, we've learned a lot. We've gotten better in a lot of ways, but what we haven't done is been able to be coordinated, and it is hurting us at the moment. So I can't stress enough that has to be industry led. And it is something that I'm keen for us all to surface in the consultation period between July and September and get a proper plan.
Great, thank you, Jade. Oh, there's claps and head nods everywhere again. I love it. Marinda?
I'm sorry to just jump in at the end and then, speak a lot. But I don't know how it's ever going to be industry led, Jade. Like, honestly, the peak bodies have different agendas. Like, LPA represents members that are companies. MEA represents individuals. Like, I know you know all this. Like, AMPAG represents the majors, and like they're all kind of competing. Like, I don't know how it's ever going to be.
So with the current to provide the space for that conversation to happen, and so to find a way forward, because whatever it is at the moment is not actually, as we're hearing, especially from multi-art form independent practitioners and organisations, is not servicing and serving the sector at large. So I hear you, there's a whole heap of barriers and a whole heap of issues. And I think that we absolutely have to surface those and deal with it once and for all. If we're going to have a conversation about what the sector looks like 10 years from now, we can't do it without having that conversation.
Can I just add one thing with that? Like, I just think if you do open up the forum, if farmers can do it, if sport can do it, if aviation can do it, seriously, there's some role models out there. We might have an antiquated system that isn't enabling advocacy. So my desire would be to learn from other sectors and see what's out there.
Yeah,
and stop doing it in isolation.
There's some really, really, really good models that sit there in other industries. We've been looking at them, they're there. I know that you can do it. And I suppose this is the interesting thing about how this piece of work fits with the next piece of work that OzCo will do. This is about trying to position a few things. So we've heard loudly that NIACA, and Marinda, we were around those conversations probably 10 years ago now, around the need for NIACA. And so we've heard that will be in here, but also an overarching industry body for your industry is critical. How that happens and what the model of that looks like is much more complex but possible, and that's for that next conversation. So this piece of work will position for that, and working out the detail is the next one. I'm aware that it's actually 8 minutes to 1. Crikey, this goes quickly. I just want to touch in about that. Are there people sitting in this beautiful online room, and you all look so gorgeous, I must say, that haven't managed to let me see your hand yet and would like to say something, comment? Claire.
Sorry, I just had to take you all off mute. Hi, for those of you that don't know me, I'm Claire. I'm the Executive Director at Design Tasmania. Yes, it's damn cold down here. Don't ask any further. No one will get murdered.
Oh, look, I'm in short sleeves.
Yeah, shut up. I just wanted to talk about, for the art, craft and design sector, we're in a really interesting space in that, again, there are other members of the ACDC network on the line here. We have not just a great band t-shirt, but we also have a really passionate group of CEOs and directors that are trying to pull together this idea of advocacy for around how do you get cut through. And one of the questions I asked in the chat was, one of the challenges we've been dealing with is understanding for craftspeople and designer makers and designers, not just the level of people that were receiving JobKeeper support or other forms of funding, but also the sense of anxiety that's building in the sector around what happens when that goes in September, and how do we invest and continue to act to support our sector. previously, I did a lot of work with the Design Institute of Australia, which is a body for professional designers, and they're part of a network called the Australian Design Alliance. One of the challenges that we found working across the sectors was always around getting enough money to support that body, that advocacy arm, and aligning the thinking. So I really hear and feel and recognise the pain that I'm hearing from other practitioners in this call, and other areas of the industry, because it isn't just a one-size-fits-all solution. And trying to find a form of consensus and alignment takes time, and we have to build these relationships with each other. And every time we go through a change or a shift in funding or a shift in the goalposts, we kind of feel like we have to start again. So I suppose the thing I'm trying to say is that we have a unique opportunity to address this. And I think it would be completely fantastic if we could look at ways in which we bring a holistic view of the well-being of our creative sector and the economic contribution that we know the arts makes to our country, to use that as the lever in which we can maybe start to have our voices heard. And I'm loving seeing the comments here. I'm just seeing like artist living wage. That would be a great place.
I know. I'm looking at this going, so I'm trying to not be distracted because I like your faces.
But anyway, basically what I'm saying is we sit, from our perspective in design and craft, we sit in this interesting meeting space between the thing that's called filthy commerce and lucre and manufacturing and creative and artistic expression. And so we don't have the solutions, but we certainly have some systems and some network ideas that we can bring to the table. So I know from my perspective, being a regional space, very happy to talk to anyone who'd like to discuss more around this.
Great. So Claire, you need to be involved then as Australia Council moves into their next phase. I just want to touch on, the comment about the intersection between, this industry and that economics, and we can't shy away from the economics, like it's part of it. There's actually quite an interesting report that was released in the last week by Deloitte, and I might try and send it to you. I'm not sure how it works, but I'll work it out, Norm and Sarah, about how to send you guys a link to that. Some of you go, ugh, it's all economics. And some of you go, oh my God, this is amazing. And so we're kind of looking at that, about how do we build a position and an argument that links into that and positions arts and culture in there. So now I know that it's nearly 1 o'clock, and I have to say it's been a total pleasure and privilege to have this conversation with all of you today. I appreciate it immensely. There are some very, very strong themes that are coming through the range of people that we're talking with. And I also think that there's a bit that kind of goes through the middle, irrespective of what your art form is or what your practice is, irrespective of whether you're a small, medium or large organisation, irrespective of whether you're a freelance or independent artist, there's some very common things that are happening. So we will capture that as the very best we can. And then of course, there's a bunch of things that are much more specific, and we have been capturing those as well. So I've made a commitment during this conversation to catch up with Kate Wood around some of the disability work and how we kind of link in with arts and health. And Lillie, I never call you Lillie, about some of the stuff that's happening for freelancers and that kind of really emergency right now. There needs to be some response. So getting an understanding of the detail of that will be important. Before we shut down, I just want to check whether there's anybody else on this call right now that I need to follow up with, and it can only be today or Saturday, that you would like a follow-up call.
I just want to jump in, Sandra, and just remind everybody that this is just the beginning. It's certainly not the end. So there are a whole range of opportunities to consult over the coming weeks and months. It'll be 2 weeks from now that some further communication comes out from the Australia Council about that. Really looking forward to talking with everyone. There's a whole range of kind of intersections around this work. So we'll be coming at it from an art form perspective, from an issues perspective, from a focused communities perspective, and a whole range of other things. So please don't feel the pressure of this moment that we're in terms of the COVID environment to try and get this piece of work finalised and up and out for the sector to use as an advocacy tool as well. We absolutely will be doing that.
Yeah.
And I would like to just take this 1 minute to let everyone know that it's Frank Panucci's last day at the Australia Council today, someone who's been an incredible advocate for community engaged practice, First Nations communities and artists, and a whole range of people across the sector for a very long time. So just to send him some love on his way out. If you're in touch.
There's love everywhere. And so just kind of in closing, I want to also acknowledge the work that Linda and Susan is doing around the Auslan. Thank you very much, and thanks for coming in for an extended period, and Ray and Manna for doing the captioning. Oh, look at that. And to Feral Arts, you know, to Norm and Sarah and Elliot, you are the bomb, and you know, this piece of infrastructure that you have and have been developing, you know, this is a classic time to evidence why that's really important in the work that you're doing. So I thank you. I don't know if I need to say anything else. Do I hand to somebody? I can't remember.
Just want to thank everyone for your time. See you later.
Thank you, everybody.
Ciao. Thanks, Sandra. Thanks, Jade. Appreciate that. Great work.
Bye.